When Hercule Poirot stepped into the sun-scorched plains of Oklahoma, he expected dust and discomfort, not a chilling kidnapping born from a buried oil field betrayal. But beneath the roar of engines and whispered threats, a deeper vengeance simmered, and only Poirot's little gray cells could see the explosion coming. I must confess, dear reader, that the notion of crossing the vast Atlantic Ocean in pursuit of adventure had always held a certain romantic appeal for me. As a retired captain of His Majesty's Army, I had seen my share of foreign shores during the Great War, dusty trenches in France, the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia. But America, that great bustling republic across the pond, had remained a distant dream, a land of cowboys and skyscrapers glimpsed only in flickering news reels and the pages of adventure novels. Little did I anticipate that it would be my good friend Hercule Poirot who would orchestrate our voyage, though not without his customary barrage of complaints and meticulous preparations. It all began on a particularly dreary morning in late June 1933 in our impeccably ordered flat at Whitehaven Mansions in London. The fog hung thick outside the windows, muffling the clatter of horse-drawn carts and the occasional hoot of a motor-car horn. I had just returned from an errand, hoping for a spot of tea, when I found him pacing the drawing room with an air of unusual agitation, a sheath of letters clutched in his manicured hand. "Ah, Hastings, mon ami," he exclaimed upon my entrance, his egg-shaped head tilting slightly as he fixed me with those piercing green eyes. "You arrive at the precise moment. My mind, it is in turmoil. Regard this missive from across the sea." He thrust a letter toward me, written on heavy cream stationery embossed with the seal of an oil company. It was from one Mr. Edmund Harrington, an American oil magnate from Oklahoma City, whom Poirot had encountered some years earlier during the affair of the stolen sapphire necklace, a case involving a flighty American heiress and a cunning jewel thief that had made the rounds in the London papers. Harrington, it seemed, had been profoundly impressed by Poirot's deductive prowess and had extended an open invitation for him to visit his vast estate in the American Midwest. "A respite from your foggy isle," the letter read, "and a chance to see the wonders of our oil fields. Bring your friend, Captain Hastings, if you like. We've room for an army out here." Poirot, ever the creature of habit and comfort, had initially demurred. "America, pa. It is a land of extremes, Hastings. Too hot in summer, too cold in winter, and always too vast for the ordered mind. The cuisine, one shudders to think, and the travel across that infernal ocean, non, 1,000 times non." But Harrington's persistence had worn him down. Letter after letter arrived, each more enticing than the last, painting pictures of endless prairies, modern conveniences, and even a subtle hint of a minor puzzle involving disputed land claims among oil barons that might pique Poirot's interest. "A trifling matter," Harrington wrote, "but one that could use a mind like yours." Finally, coupled with Poirot's own restlessness, London had been unusually quiet of late, with no scandals worthy of his talents. He relented. "And so, Hastings," he declared that morning, adjusting his immaculate mustache before the gilt-edged mirror with the precision of a surgeon, "we shall venture to this America. But mark my words, it will be a land of barbarism cloaked in progress, too noisy, too hurried, too American. Yet my intellect, it craves stimulation. We depart on the next steamer from Southampton." I was thrilled, of course. The prospect of new horizons stirred the old soldier in me. We set sail on the 8th of July aboard the RMS Berengaria, a Cunard liner renowned for its luxury, though Poirot would later describe it as a floating prison of discomfort. The ship was a marvel. Towering funnels, belching smoke, decks teeming with passengers from all walks of life, elegant Europeans in furs and jewels, boisterous Americans returning home with tales of Parisian fashion, and even a smattering of Hollywood types whispering about the latest films. Our cabins were adjoining, first class naturally, with Poirot insisting on every amenity. Fresh flowers daily, his favorite tisane brewed to perfection, and a steward who understood the importance of symmetry in bed linens. As we steamed out of harbor, waving farewell to the misty English coast, I stood at the rail, the salt spray invigorating my senses. "What an adventure, Poirot," I called over the wind. "Think of it. New York, Chicago, the Wild West." He joined me reluctantly, bundled in a great coat despite the mild breeze, his face a mask of stoic suffering. Adventure, bah! It is the method that matters, Hastings, not this rocking like a cradle gone mad. Already the stomach protests. I shall retire to my cabin and meditate upon the order of things. The crossing took a full week, and it was, as I anticipated, a trial for my friend. Poirot spent much of the journey ensconced in his quarters, lamenting the roll of the waves and the inadequacy of the ship's cuisine. Hastings, he would moan during my visits, clutching a vial of his herbal remedy. How can one think clearly when the sea insists on this infernal dance? The soup sloshes, the mind sloshes. It is an outrage against the method and the order, and these Americans on board, they eat with such haste as if the food will escape. I, on the other hand, reveled in the experience. The Baronaria was a floating city. Grand ballrooms, where orchestras played the latest jazz tunes, promenades for strolling under the stars, and dining halls serving exotic dishes like lobster thermidor and peach melbourne. I mingled with the passengers, a banker from Philadelphia who regaled me with stories of the stock market crash of '29, a young actress bound for Broadway with dreams in her eyes, and a group of oilmen from Texas boasting of their gushes. Talk often turned to the state of the nation, the Great Depression gripping America, banks failing, bread lines stretching for blocks, and the bold new president, Franklin Roosevelt, promising a new deal to pull the country from the abyss. One evening, over cigars in the smoking lounge, a grizzled veteran of the Oklahoma oil fields warned me of the lawlessness brewing. "It's rough out there, Captain," he drawled, his voice thick with tobacco. "Folks are desperate. Bank robbers like that Dillinger fell. Kidnappers snatching the rich for ransom. Ever since that poor Lindbergh baby last year, no one's safe. Watch your back in Oklahoma." I dismissed it lightly then, but his words lingered. A faint shadow on the horizon. By the time we docked in New York Harbor on the 15th of July, the Statue of Liberty looming like a green sentinel, I felt invigorated, ready to embrace the skyscrapers and the ceaseless energy of the city. The air was alive with the honks of yellow taxis, the shouts of newsboys hawking papers about Roosevelt's latest reforms, and the scent of hot dogs from street vendors. Poirot, however, emerged from the ship pale and resolute, his valve in hand, insisting we waste no time in boarding a train westward. New York, it is a marvel, yes, he conceded, as we navigated the throngs at Pennsylvania Station, with its towers scraping the sky like the fingers of giants. But it is too noisy, too chaotic for Hercule Poirot. The dust, the crowds, they assault the senses. No, we go directly to this Oklahoma, where the air is dry and the puzzles perhaps more subtle. I have wired Harrington. He expects us. Our journey westward aboard the luxurious Pullman cars of the Santa Fe Railway was a revelation. The train, sleek and silver, cut through the verdant hills of Pennsylvania, then the flat farmlands of Ohio and Indiana, before plunging into the heartland. We dined on roast beef and apple pie in the observation car, watching the landscape shift from rolling green to the golden wheat fields of Kansas. Poirot, gradually recovering his equilibrium, even deigned to comment on the scenery. "It is vast, Hastings, endless like the mind without discipline. But there is a certain symmetry in the straight lines of these rails." We arrived in Oklahoma City on the evening of the 21st, the train pulling into the station under a sky painted with the fiery hues of a prairie sunset, oranges and purples bleeding into the horizon like an artist's palette overturned. The air was warm and dry, carrying the faint acrid tang of oil from the nearby dirks that dotted the landscape like skeletal sentinels. Mr. Edmund Harrington met us on the platform, a tall, withered man in his 50s, dressed in a Stetson hat and boots polished to a shine, his face creased from years under the relentless sun. His grip was firm, his draw leisurely and welcoming. "Miss Poirot, Captain Hastings, welcome to God's own country," he boomed, clapping me on the back with enough force to jostle my hat. "I've got the automobile waiting, a brand new Packard, smooth as silk. The ranch is just a short drive. You'll have the guest house all to yourselves. Tomorrow I'll show you the fields and introduce you to some fine folks, including my neighbor, Mr. Charles Urschel. He's an oil like me, made a fortune through his late wife's family, tied to old Tom Slick, the Wildcat King. Sharp as a tack, that one. You'll get along famously. As we motored through the city, its streets wide and lined with modest brick buildings, the occasional Art Deco skyscraper piercing the twilight, Harrington chatted amiably about local affairs. Oklahoma City was booming despite the depression, fueled by black gold gushing from the earth. But beneath the prosperity, he hinted at tensions. Labor disputes in the fields, bootleggers running moonshine since Prohibition's end was still fresh, and whispers of organized crime creeping in from Chicago. We reached Harrington's ranch as night fell, a sprawling estate of several hundred acres, with a main house of red brick and white columns reminiscent of a southern plantation transplanted to the plains. The guest house was a cozy bungalow furnished with leather armchairs, Navajo rugs, and a fireplace stocked with most white wood. That night we dined on the veranda under a canopy of stars, the table laden with fried steak, okra, cornbread, and pecan pie. Hearty fare that Poirot eyed with suspicion, but eventually pronounced tolerable for the colonies. Talk turned, as it often does among men of means, to the troubles of the times. Harrington leaned back in his wicker chair, a cigar glowing in the dark. Times are hard, gentlemen. The crash hit us all, but oil's kept Oklahoma afloat. Still, desperation breeds varmints. Bank robbers like Pretty Boy Floyd, kidnappers eyeing fat ransoms. Just last month, some poor soul in Kansas City was snatched. Keep your wits about you. Poirot, twirling the ends of his mustache, a sure sign his mind was engaged, smiled enigmatically. Ah, but desperation, Manami, it leaves traces. The criminal mind, it cannot escape the net of logic and order. In Belgium, in England, and even here in your America, the truth reveals itself to those who observe. I retired that night to the soft hum of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle, my mind abuzz with the novelty of it all. Little did we know, as the moon rose high over the prairie, that fate was already weaving its dark threads, and that our tranquil visit would soon be shattered by a crime as bold as the land itself. The following morning dawned bright and mercilessly hot, the sun climbing swiftly into a cloudless sky that seemed to stretch forever. I awoke refreshed, the air in the guest house scented with sagebrush, and the faint aroma of coffee brewing in the main house. Poirot, ever the early riser, despite his protests about the discomforts of travel, was already dressed in his lightest summer suit, a linen affair with a silk tie that he adjusted fussily. "Hastings, you sleep like the dead," he chided, as I joined him on the verge for breakfast. "While you slumber, my brain has been at work. This air, it is dry, yes, but invigorating. Perhaps America has its merits, after all." Harrington appeared shortly, clad in riding breeches and a wide-brimmed hat, ready to give us the grand tour. "Gentlemen, hop in the Packard. We'll head out to the fields first. See where the magic happens." The drive took us through undulating plains, past herds of longhorn cattle, and fields of cotton swaying in the breeze. Soon the landscape was punctuated by oil dirks, their rhythmic pumping like the heartbeat of the earth. Harrington pulled up at one of his rigs, a towering wooden structure manned by roughnecks in oil-stained overalls. "This here's number 7, he explained proudly, pumping 500 barrels a day. Black gold, boys. It's what built this state." Poirot, shielding his eyes from the glare, nodded politely, but I could see his interest was waning. Machinery held little appeal for him. It was the human element that fascinated. "And these disputes you mentioned in your letters, Massey, the land claims." Harrington chuckled. "Are that minor squabbles? Some wildcatters claiming overlapping leases. Nothing a good lawyer can't sort, but I thought it might amuse you. Say, tonight we're heading to the Urschels for bridge. Charles and Brennus are hosting. We'll all drive over together in the Packard after supper." The day passed in a blur of introductions. Lunch at a downtown diner, where we sampled chili and biscuits, a visit to the state capitol with its gleaming dome, and an afternoon stroll through a bustling market where vendors hawked everything from fresh corn to Indian beadwork. By evening, as we dressed for the Urschels, the heat had eased, replaced by a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming yucca. Louise Harrington, a charming woman with a warm smile and a quick laugh, joined us for the short drive, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown. The Urschel residence was a testament to oil wealth, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion on the city's affluent north side, surrounded by manicured gardens and a wrought iron fence. Charles Urschel greeted us at the door, a robust man of about 50 with keen blue eyes, a firm jaw, and the easy confidence of success. His wife, Bones, was gracious and poised, her southern accent soft as velvet. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Edmund, sung your praises, Urschel said, ushering our group into a drawing room adorned with Persian rugs and crystal chandeliers. And good to see you again, Edmund Louise. Heard about that necklace business, Morrow. We're honored to have a real detective under our roof, though I hope we shan't need your services. We settled on the veranda with iced tea and lemonade, the conversation flowing freely. Will spoke of his business ventures, tied to the legacy of Tom Slick, the legendary prospector. Oil's a gamble, but it pays off, he said. Poirot, ever observant, asked pointed questions about local crime, drawing out tales of bootleg gangs and Dust Bowl migrants turning to desperation. As dusk fell, we moved inside for bridge. The table was set with green baize, cards crisp and new. Urschel partnered with his wife Harrington with me, while Poirot observed from an armchair, sipping a herbal infusion. Cards are a window to the soul, Manami, he murmured to me. The bids reveal the character. The game was underway, Urschel bidding boldly when the evening shattered. It happened so swiftly that even now recalling it, my pulse quickens and a chill runs down my spine, as if the warm Oklahoma night had turned icy in an instant. We were well into the rubber, the atmosphere in the drawing room, one of companionable concentration. The soft glow of the lamps cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table, illuminating the scattered cards like fallen leaves. The French door stood ajar to admit the balmy night air, heavy with the scent of jasmine from the garden beyond, and the distant hum of crickets provided a rhythmic underscore to our game. A solitary moth drawn inexorably to the light fluttered erratically against the wire screen, its wings beating a frantic tattoo that seemed in retrospect an ominous prelude. Mrs. Urschel Bones, as she had insisted we call her, had just laid down a trump with a triumphant smile, her delicate fingers lingering on the card as if to savor the moment. "That should take the trick, gentlemen," she said lightly, her southern drawl adding a musical lilt to the words. Urschel chuckled, adjusting his spectacles, while Harrington frowned at his hand, muttering something about unlucky draws. I, partnered with Harrington, was pondering my next play, my mind half on the game and half on the novelty of this American evening, so far removed from the fog-shrouded drawing rooms of England, when the crash came. The French doors flew inward with a violent splintering of wood, the hinges groaning in protest. Glass shattered from a nearby pane, tinkling to the floor like brittle rain. In stormed two masked figures, their faces obscured by crude black cloths tied bandit style, eyes gleaming with cold intent through the slits. The first was a burly brute of a man, broad-shouldered and imposing, with a Thompson submachine gun, that infamous Chicago typewriter, slung casually over one shoulder like a deadly accessory to his rough attire, a rumpled suit jacket over workman's trousers, boots caked with red dust that left faint tracks on the Persian rug. His companion was slighter, wiry as a coiled spring, clad in a dark shirt and pants that blended into the shadows, brandishing a revolver with a barrel that seemed unnaturally long in the lamplight. "Nobody move," the burly one snarled, his voice muffled by the mask, but commanding, laced with a hint of a Midwestern twang, flat and nasal, like the oilmen I'd overheard in the market earlier that day. He swept the room with his gaze, the machine gun twitching slightly, as if eager for use. The slider man fanned out to the side, his revolver waving menacingly, covering us all with quick, jerky motions. Chaos erupted in a heartbeat. Bones gasped sharply, her hand flying to her throat as her cards scattered across the table in a flurry of red and black. Harrington half rose from his chair, his face draining of color to a ghostly pallor, his mouth opening in a silent protest. Louise let out a stifled whimper, clutching the arm of her chair. Urschel froze, his eyes widening behind his spectacles, the color rising in his cheeks as indignation battled fear. As for me, old army instinct surged unbidden. I instinctively reached for a sidearm that wasn't there, my hand closing on empty air at my hip. How many times in the trenches had I faced sudden peril? Yet here, in this civilized drawing room, The shock was all the more profound. The intruders wasted no time, their movements efficient, almost rehearsed. They scanned the room with hard, predatory eyes, the burly one's mask shifting slightly as he barked. "Which one's Urschel? Speak up or we'll make this messy." His companion edged closer to the table, the revolver trained on us, his free hand twitching as if itching to act. In the confusion that followed, voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and defiance. Both Urschel and Harrington were singled out, perhaps due to their similar builds or the dim lighting. "You and you up," the leader growled, gesturing with the machine gun. Rough hand seized them. Wrists were bound with coarse rope that bit into the skin. Blindfolds, dirty rags by the look, slapped over their eyes. Urschel managed a muffled protest. "What in God's name?" but was cut short by a shove. Harrington stumbled, nearly knocking over a side table laden with crystal glasses that clinked alarmingly. "You're coming with us," the burly leader snarled, prodding them toward the shattered doors with the butt of his gun. Brennis cried out, rising halfway from her seat. "Charles, no, please." But her plea was met with a deafening warning shot from the revolver, fired upward into the ornate plaster ceiling. Bits of debris rained down like confetti from hell, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the room, choking the air. We all froze, the echo reverberating through the house like thunder. The men vanished into the night as abruptly as they had appeared, dragging their captives with them. Outside, an engine roared to life, a powerful motor by the sound, perhaps a stolen sedan, tires crunching gravel as the car sped away into the darkness, leaving only the fading growl and a cloud of dust visible in the moonlight. Poirot sprang to his feet with surprising agility for a man of his Phidias habits, his composure cracking for a rare moment, his face pale, eyes wide with a mix of outrage and calculation. "Hastings, the telephone. Alert the police at once. Madam Chell, are you unharmed? And you, Madam Harrington?" I dashed to the telephone on the sideboard, my heart pounding like a war drum, fingers trembling as I dialed the operator. "Police, emergency. There's been a kidnapping at the Urschel residence." The words tumbled out, my voice steadier than I felt. Minutes later, agonizing minutes that stretched like hours, filled with Bones's sobs and Louise's hushed prayers. Tires screeched, once more on the drive. A figure stumbled through the broken doors. Harrington, blindfold askew and dangling from one ear, his suit disheveled, face slick with sweat. He collapsed against the frame, gasping for breath. They stopped the car a few blocks away, demanded our wallets, identification. When I said I wasn't Urschel, they cursed and shoved me out into the road, drove off with him. God, it was terrifying. Brennis collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands clasped in despair. "Charles, oh God, what do they want? Why him?" Pooh knelt beside her with uncharacteristic gentleness, his small hand resting lightly on her arm, his voice soothing yet firm, laced with that Belgian precision that always steadied me in crisis. "Madame Courage Poirot is here, and we shall find him. I give him my word. Though I witnessed the intrusion myself, each of us may have perceived different nuances in the heat of the moment. Tell me your impressions, the timbre of their voices, the peculiarities of their gait, any small detail that struck you, no matter how insignificant. It is often the personal observation, the overlooked trifle that unlocks the puzzle." Even in that fraught instant, I marveled at my friend's method. Already his mind was furring, sifting through the chaos for order. The police arrived soon after, their sirens wailing in the distance before screeching to a halt outside. Local officers burst in first, revolvers drawn, followed by federal agents from the Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, as the Americans called it, newly empowered in such matters. Leading them was Special Agent Colvin, a stern, no-nonsense man in a rumpled suit and fedora, clutching a clipboard like a shield. He surveyed the room with sharp eyes, taking in the shattered doors, the bullet hole in the ceiling, and our shaken group. "Kidnapping's federal jurisdiction, now since the Lindbergh Law. We'll handle this." Statements from everyone. But Brennis, rallying with a spark of determination, insisted through her tears. "I'm sure Poirot must help. He solved worse crimes than this, far worse." Colvin eyed Poirot skeptically, sizing up the diminutive Belgian with his waxed mustache and impeccable evening dress. European detective, huh? This ain't Baker Street. Mr. Poirot smiled thinly, his eyes twinkling with that familiar gleam of intellectual superiority. No, it is not. But crime, sure, is universal, and so is the power of my mental faculties. The aftermath of the abduction hung over the Urschel residence like a pall. The elegant drawing room, now a disordered tableau of shattered glass and overturned chairs, reflected the chaos left behind. Through the broken French doors, gusts of prairie night air carried the indifferent sounds of distant crickets. The acrid scent of gunpowder lingered, mixing with the spilled tea and scattered cards. A grim echo of the evening's violence. Agent Colvin and his federal team moved with the brisk efficiency of men used to crisis. They cordoned off the veranda, their voices low and urgent, while flashlights swept the garden beyond in search of footprints or discarded evidence. Local officers, still wide-eyed at the FBI's swift arrival under the newly enacted Lindbergh Law, followed orders without question. Brennus sat rigid in an armchair, her face pale, clutching a brandy Louise had pressed into her hands. "Sip this, dear. It'll steady you." Harrington paced by the fireplace, a tight coil of nervous energy. I stood nearby, helpless in a way I hadn't felt since the trenches. Poirot, however, was in motion, calm, exacting, while Colvin barked commands. "Get statements. Dust for prints." Poirot drifted through the room like a surgeon entering an operating theater. He knelt at the card table, magnifying glass in hand, studying the scattered deck. "Hastings come," he said softly, his voice cutting clean through the din. "Observe. The Queen of Hearts, Madame Urschel's trump, lies face up, stepped on. But look, the boot print is partial. The sole is patterned with a crosshatch, unlike any gentleman's shoe." I leaned in. "The kidnapper's boots. Surely the agents will note that." Poirot shook his head, amused. "They'll note size and direction. But this clay is red, moist, with traces of black residue. Oil from the dirks, perhaps, and the pressure is uneven. One of them limps. An old injury possibly. Manami, the agent's rush we observe." Colvin, passing by, overheard and gave a skeptical grunt. "Limping oily clay. This isn't a parlor game, sure. This is real. That Thompson was no toy. These are gangsters. Could be that Kelly gang we've heard about." Poirot rose unfazed. "Presses him. Agent Colvin, the weapon is for theater, but details. Sure, details are the key. Let us speak to the witnesses while their memories still burn bright." At Bones's nod, we moved to the library, a calm space where Poirot gently questioned each of us. Colvin stood by, taking notes with reluctant professionalism. Harrington recounted his brief abduction. The car was a black Ford-dented fender. The men called each other Boss and Al. The smaller one had a slight lisp. Poirot tapped his chin. "Al common, yes, but useful. And the smell? Tobacco. Perhaps. Cheap cigars." Harrington replied. "The big one rare of them." Brennus, still trembling, added. "The burly man had a faded anchor tattoo on his forearm. His glove leather was torn at the thumb." Louise nodded. The thinner one dragged his left leg slightly. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Bon, a portrait begins to form. Clues dismissed as trivial, yet together they speak volumes." Midnight came. The house settled into uneasy silence. Federal agents patrolled. We retired to the guest rooms, Poirot and I sharing one at Bren's insistence. "I feel safer with you here," she whispered. The next morning dawned bright in Piddles, the prairie sun rising on a household steeped in anxiety. Breakfast was subdued, toast and coffee served by a trembling maid. Outside, newsboys shouted, "Oil tycoon kidnapped. Gangsters strike in Oklahoma." Colvin's men held the press at bay. Poirot, revived by his Tyson, insisted we revisit the garden. The night hides, the day reveals. Outside we found trampled flower beds and a broken branch where the kidnappers had likely waited. Colvin's men had marked footprints, but Poirot knelt again, brushing aside gravel. "Here, cigarette butt," he said. "Turkish tobacco, not American," and the filter chewed. "Nervous habit. Likely our Al," a nearby agent scoffed. "Could be anyone's." Gardner guessed. No, Poirot replied mildly. The gardener smokes a pipe. His pouch is in the shed. None of us stepped outside last night. This is fresh. One waited here, anxious. We traced the path to the drive. Tire tracks scored the gravel. Wide treads, heavy car. I noted we but see the oil drip, greenish, not motor oil. Possibly aviation fuel or Dirk runoff. More oil field traces. The pattern builds. Harrington joined us, face tight. Any word from the kidnappers? Culvin approached, holding a sealed envelope. Just now left under the gate. Inside, $200,000 unmarked. Instructions to follow. No feds or he dies. Poirot examined it. Cheap paper, ink from a fountain pen, broad nib, bold strokes. A man used to command yet impatient. The day wore on. The house felt like a kettle near boil. Poirot pored over maps, muttering about roads south, while I helped question staff. No breakthroughs yet. Clues gathered. Bits of a larger mosaic only Poirot could see forming. I realized then that the hunt had earnestly started. The afternoon sun climbed relentlessly, turning the Oklahoma prairie into a shimmering kiln. Heat radiated off the hard-packed earth, invisible waves warping the horizon until the distant oil dirks danced like spectral towers. Inside the residence, the heat did nothing to lift the oppressive mood. Tension clung to the rooms like humidity, thickening each breath, coiling around every sentence left unfinished. The ransom note lay at the center of it all, an object of fear and focus. Its brutal clarity had galvanized Agent Culvin, who now moved with brisk efficiency, directing his men like a battlefield commander. He dispatched agents to canvass local pharmacies and stationery shops, hoping to trace the envelope or the cheap, unremarkable paper. Low-grade pulp stock, no watermark, no prints, of course. Culvin muttered as he sealed the envelope for shipment to Washington's crime lab. Still, we'll knock on every goddamn drugstore door in the county if we have to. Sometimes a clerk remembers a face. Brennis had entered the drawing room in time to hear the tail end of Culvin's growling assessment. She clutched her pearls with the unconscious desperation of a drowning swimmer reaching for the surface. Her voice trembled. $200,000. We can raise it surely. Edmund, your banks. Harrington was already ahead of her, his jaw set in grim determination. I'll make the calls quietly through men I trust. No headlines, no reason to rattle the markets. He glanced at Poirot, who sat absorbed in studying the note's photograph. The original had been kept under lock and key, but even the reproduction seemed to reveal secrets under Pooh's meticulous eye and magnifying lens. What do you see, monsieur? Harrington asked, beyond ink and intimidation. Poirot straightened his gaze sharp beneath knitted brows. Observe the language. It is controlling. Instructions follow. That is not merely logistics. It is theater. They are orchestrating fear, building suspense like an author pacing a novel. Nesper. Culvin agreed, immediately ordering extra guards posted at every entrance. Until we get the next step, we sit tight. Could be a call, another letter, even a coded message in the papers. These guys like control. They'll want to dictate every move. Outside, the world spun on, heedless. The sun beat down like an inquisitor. Reporters drawn by the scent of scandal and spectacle swarmed the front gates. Their calls and flashbulbs pierced the drawn curtains. Any news? Have they made demands? Is it Dillinger's gang? The FBI agents drove them off like flies, but rumors leaked nonetheless. By mid-afternoon, local radio stations were already buzzing with wild speculation, suggesting everything from Al Capone's ghost network to a rogue band of oilmen turned gangsters. Poirot, undeterred by the den or the heat, proposed a field excursion to the oil fields. Hastings, we must follow the thread of the mud, the peculiar greenish drip on Lewis's porch. It whispers of petroleum, not aviation fuel, as I once assumed. Harrington took the wheel of his Packard, and we drove out along the dusty roads, the sun casting long shadows from the nodding dirks. Machinery clanked and hissed, the scent of crude oil thick in the air. Roughnecks worked shirtless, shouting over the roar of diesel engines, their overalls dark with grease and sweat. Poirot climbed down at one particularly active site, holding his glass vial against a sunbeam like a chemist. "Voila," he said, pointing to a spill near a pumping station. The sheen matched perfectly. "It is a blend. Crude oil and an industrial additive used in these machines, not airplane fuel. A derrick leak. The kidnapper's car has been here or somewhere like it recently. They may have hidden Urschel in an abandoned rig." A foreman, hands on hips and brow dripping with sweat, approached. "You fellas looking for someone? Heard about Urschel? Bad business." Poirot dewed his hat. "Oui, monsieur, we inquire only. Have you seen strangers recently? A black Ford, perhaps, with unusually wide tire tracks?" The man scratched his head. "Matter of fact, yeah, 2 days ago. Couple fellas asking for work. Didn't stay long. One was a big ox, other skinny, twitchy with a limp. Had a Ford Texas plates, I think." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A limp, you say?" "Yeah." The little one dragged his foot. "Odd duck. Said they were wildcatters, but something was off." Poirot thanked the man, with a discreet tip. On the drive back, he sat in silence for a time, twisting the end of his mustache. "The pieces, they begin to align," he said at last. "The car matches our tire tracks. The limp. Louise saw it, remember? And Texas. If true, it confirms they've come from the south. That detail adds texture to the picture forming in my mind." Back at the house, the mood had curdled into something brittle. Evening approached. No word from the kidnappers, no phone call, no letter, only silence, which grew heavier with each ticking minute. Inside, Culvin's men wired the phones for traceability. Harrington oversaw the preparation of the ransom. Bundles of marked bills delivered in discreet, unmarked cases, heavily guarded. The weight of that money sat in the parlor, like a bomb waiting to go off. Brenna stood on the verge, her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were rimmed in red, her voice. "How long must we endure this, Charles? God knows where he is. Alone, frightened, perhaps hurt." Louise brought her tea, murmuring quiet reassurances, but the strain etched lines into every face. Poirot pulled me aside. "They manipulate emotion, mon ami, to extract not just money, but desperation, but delay can betray them. Time is our ally if we use it wisely." As night fell, a storm grumbled on the distant plains. Lightning flickered on the horizon like flashes of warning. I retired with a heart grown heavy and restless. The air felt charged, as if the prairie itself held its breath. That night's sleep came in fits, haunted by images, shadowy figures with sackcloth masks, the shriek of tires on gravel, a boy's cry swallowed by thunder. Somewhere out there Charles waited, and so did the next move. At dawn it came. Dawn crept over the prairie like a thief, pale light filtering through the curtains of the Urschel residence, casting long, wavering shadows across the polished floors. I had scarcely closed my eyes when a sharp rap at the door roused me. Poirot, already impeccably dressed, his mustache waxed to perfection despite the hour. "Hastings, vite, there is movement below. The kidnappers, they stir at last." We descended to find the household in a flurry. Culvin stood in the hall, a fresh envelope in his gloved hand, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. "Came with the milk delivery, tucked into the crate. Kidnapper must have paid the boy off." The milkman, a bewildered local with a cap askew, was being questioned in the kitchen. "Swear I didn't see nobody, sir. Just the usual run." The note, typed on the same cheap stock as before, was brief and commanding. "Satchel at midnight. Old mill on Route 66, 5 miles south. Black Ford alone, eyes on you. No shadows. Or he feeds the crows." Bones, wrapped in a silk robe, read it over Culvin's shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth. "Midnight tonight. Oh, Edmund, you'll go." Harrington nodded, his jaw set like flint. "Of course. The funds are ready. I'll drive it myself. No risks with strangers." Pooh examined the missive with his lens, his brow furrowing. The tone grows bolder, more vivid. The crows, a touch of the dramatic. Our boss fancies himself a poet of peril. And the mill, isolated, yes, but near those abandoned fields we noted. A calculated choice. Culvin mapped the site immediately, pinning it on the wall chart. "We'll stake it out discreetly. Men in the brush a mile back, binoculars. No closer. Can't spook them." His voice carried the edge of experience. honed from the Lindbergh aftermath, where every kidnapping now bore the weight of federal fury. The day unfolded in a haze of preparation, the heat outside building to a sweltering crescendo that mirrored our inner turmoil. Harrington rehearsed the drive in his Packard first, timing the route along Route 66, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through golden wheat and scrub. The old mill, a derelict sentinel with its sagging roof and rusted machinery. "Clear view from the hill opposite," he reported upon return, his voice laced with unease. "They'll watch, all right." Felt eyes on me even now in broad daylight. Louise busied herself with Brennus, brewing endless pots of tea laced with brandy to steady nerves, while the maid flitted about like a frightened bird, trays clattering. Reporters, sensing the shift in activity, redoubled their assault on the gates. Their cries a constant drone. Ransom paid Urschel alive. Colvin's agents dispersed them with threats of arrest, but the airwaves crackled with conjecture. Tales of Machine Gun Kelly's shadow looming over the Midwest. Whispers of desperate Dust Bowl drifters turning to crime in these hard times. Poirot, ever the methodical soul, used the hours to refine his portrait of the culprits. We pored over police files in the library, the fan whirring lazily overhead, stirring the heavy air scented with leather-bound books and cigar smoke from Colvin's occasional indulgence. Regard Hastings, George Kelly, Ainan Marin, Donk, Longedge, Tattooage, Baroness, spied, boastful, fond of his Thompson gun, Albert Bates, lisping, scarred with that telltale limp from a prison brawl, and Catherine his wife, the intellect behind the brawn. The notes cunning delays, the psychological barbs, they bear a woman's finesse. I nodded, the mosaic clarifying, yet a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. And the Texas connection from the foreman's account. They flee south, hiding in the wilds. But what of Urschel? It has been days now, enduring God knows what torments. Poirot placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. A man of resource, mon ami. He will have observed even in darkness the human spirit. It finds ways. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery oranges that bled into the endless horizon, the tension coiled tighter. Whispers circulated among the agents. Rumors of sightings in Amarillo. A black Ford spotted near the border. Colvin dismissed most as chaff, but one report lingered. A woman matching Catherine's description, flashing cash in a Dallas speakeasy. "If it's them, they're getting cocky," he growled, spending before the ink's dry. Dinner was a sparse, strained ritual. Cold cuts and salad. No one with appetite for more. Bones picked at her plate, her eyes distant, murmuring prayers under her breath. Louise urged her to eat, her own face drawn with worry. Harrington, the satchel at his feet like a chained beast, checked his watch repeatedly. 3 hours till midnight. Feels like an eternity. Poirot, sipping his herbal infusion, offered quiet counsel. "Courage, monsieur. Note every detail. The wind's direction. Any sense on the air. Shadows that move unnaturally. The drop. It is not merely exchange. It is revelation." Dusk deepened into night, the prairie alive with the chirp of crickets and the occasional howl of a coyote. Sounds that now carried an ominous undertone. We saw Harrington off from the drive, the black Ford, borrowed from a discreet contact, purring softly as he vanished into the darkness, headlights cutting swaths through the inky void. Brennus watched from an upstairs window, her silhouette a ghost against the curtain, handkerchief pressed to her lips. "Godspeed," she whispered, the words carried away on the warm breeze. Poirot and I joined Colvin in an unmarked sedan, trailing at a safe distance, our hearts pounding with the thrill of the chase, tempered by fear. What if they spotted us? What if the drop went airy and Urschel paid the price? The road unspooled like a black ribbon, stars wheeling overhead in the vast Oklahoma sky. Midnight at the mill was a scene from a Gothic tale. The structure loomed skeletal under a half-moon, wind whispering through cracked boards, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay. Harrington's lights approached, paused. The satchel thumped to the ground by the wheelhouse. He drove off without a backward glance as instructed. We waited in the shadows, breath held, the minutes stretching like tore wire. Crickets sang their indifferent chorus. A distant train whistled mournfully. Then a rustle from the hill opposite. Figures emerged, cloaked in darkness, snatching the bag and vanishing like wraiths into the underbrush. Culvin's spotters whispered over the radio. 2 men, big one, smaller with limp. Ford southbound. No shots, no pursuit. Hold as planned. The drive back was agonizing. Silence broken only by the engine's hum and our unspoken fears. Had it worked? Would Urschel return? Or had we handed over a fortune for naught? The house loomed ahead, lights burning in every window, a beacon of fragile hope. Dawn brought no immediate word, the house a vigil of whispered prayers and pacing. Bones scarcely slept, her eyes hollow as she stared at the horizon, the rising sun mocking our exhaustion. Coffee grew cold in cups, cigarettes burned down in ashtrays. Agents monitored wires, but the line stayed silent. Then mid-morning on the 31st, the telephone jangled. A diner owner 20 miles out. Fella here says he's Urschel. Beat up but breathing. We raced there, the Packard devouring the road, dust billowing in our wake. The diner was a humble oasis of chrome and grease, patrons gaping as we burst in. Urschel sat in a booth, disheveled in torn clothes, blindfold discarded beside a half-eaten sandwich, his face gaunt, but eyes bright with relief. "Charles!" Brennis cried, rushing to embrace him, sobs racking her frame as the weight of 9 harrowing days dissolved in tears. He held her tightly, voice from disuse. "It's over, darling. They dumped me at sunup, highway's edge, blindfolded till the last, but alive. Over pie and coffee." Urschel insisted on eating properly, his appetite returning with a vengeance. We heard his tale, the diner's patrons eavesdropping unabashedly from nearby stools. Driven hours that first night south, I reckon by the turns and the rising heat. Held in a remote shack, farm smells, tin roof rattling in the wind, chained to a bedpost, fed cornbread and water, blindfolded the whole infernal time. But I wasn't idle, kept my wits sharp. Urschel managed a re-smile, tapping his wrist where a watch still ticked faithfully. The blindfold. They used rags tied loosely at times, especially when they thought me asleep or dazzle. I'd shifted just enough, peek at the dial when their backs were turned, or during meals when they loosened it to feed me. Counted the hours between 2 meals at rough intervals, the shift from day warmth to night chills seeping through the cracks. Planes roared overhead like clockwork. 9:45 mornings, 5:45 evenings, give or take a minute. And the storms, 23rd and 26th, thunder shaking the walls, rain pounding like artillery. Dry as bone after no more downpours. Poirot's eyes sparkled with admiration. "Superb, sure. You have been the detective in chains, charting your prison. Sun sight. The routes, commercial flights, no doubt. The weather verifiable from reports. We pinpoint a layer with this." Culvin, scribbling furiously, radioed it in. Maps unfurling even as we sat. Dallas Amarillo line matches those times, and Storm's Paradise. Texas got hammered those days. Oklahoma stayed clear. As we drove home, triumph mingled with resolve. The prairie unfolding under a now blazing sun. Urschel reunited with his wife added more fragments. Voices gruff boss with sailor slang. Lisping Al muttering complaints. Sense of cheap cigars and machine oil. Argued once about a woman. Sharp voice on the phone calling the shots. "Catherine," Poirot murmured. The puzzle nearing completion. The end loomed. The gray cells poised for the final strike, but the tension lingered like the heat. Would justice prevail, or had the villains slipped the noose? The drive back to the Urschel residence passed in a haze of elation and urgency, the prairie sun climbing high and merciless, baking the earth until the horizon shimmered like a distant mirage. Urschel, nestled between Bones and Louise in the rear seat, recounted more fragments of his ordeal, snatches of conversation, the boss's boastful tales of bootleg runs, the lisping owl's grumbles about that oil deal gone sour. Poirot, seated beside me in the front, listened with rapt attention, his fingers drumming a rhythmic tattoo on his knee, his sharp mind already forging connections that eluded the rest of us. "Mommy," he murmured as the Packard ate up the miles. The puzzle it nears completion, but one question lingers. Why you, Mr. Urschel, not the richest in Oklahoma, yet targeted with such precision? The stakeout at the house, the fignet search for work in the fields. These are not the acts of opportunists. None. They reconnaissance with purpose. A grudge perhaps rooted in the black gold that flows beneath this land. Recall Harrington's letters inviting us here. They hinted at disputed land claims among oil barons, a trifling matter that might amuse the mental apparatus. Have you been embroiled in such a dispute recently? A lease, perhaps, that left bitter losers? Urschel paused, his brow furrowing as he rubbed his chafed wrists. Disputed claims. Yes, there was one last year, the Slick lease, named after old Tom Slick's legacy. I outbid a Texas consortium for it. Turned a tidy profit when it gushed. Heard grumblings from the losers. Some small syndicate went bankrupt over it, but nothing came of it. Or so I thought. Why? You think that's connected? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Presses them. The oil deal gone sour. You overheard. It echoes that very lease. The kidnappers' oil traces match those fields. Their job hunt was to eavesdrop on rig hands, boasting of your windfall. If the losing bidders tie to Kelly's circle, perhaps family, the motive crystallizes. Ransom for gain, vengeance for ruin. Poirot nodded. We verify. Upon return, the dossier cross-referenced the syndicate members with Kelly's known associates. My intellect senses the link. Back at the residence, the air buzzed with renewed purpose. Urschel, safely ensconced with Bones, rested under the doctor's care, while Poirot dove into the files Colvin had amassed. Harrington joined, pulling old lease records from Urschel's study. Here the Slick bidders, a Texas consortium led by one R.J. Shannon, bankrupt after Urschel won. Colvin rifled through suspect profiles. Shannon, Kelly's wife's maiden name, in-laws, and they own a farm in Paradise, Texas. That's the hideout. Poirot's eyes flashed. Presses him out. The grudge Shannon ruined by the lease turns to kin for revenge. Kelly and Bates execute. Catherine plans. The field's job hunt to eavesdrop on rig hands, boasting of Urschel's windfall from that claim. The stakeout confirmed the bridge routine. Why Urschel? He embodied their loss. The victor who struck oil where they struck dirt. Colvin whistled. Motive ties them like a noose, but proof at the farm. Poirot rose energized. We verify at the source to Paradise, not for raid, but to unearth proofs, witnesses, remnants. Hastings, Harrington, accompany me. Colvin, alert your men discreetly. My reasoning faculties will guide. We set off southward that evening, the sedan slicing through the cooling air, the prairie yielding to Texas hills under starlight. Poirot directed with maps and schedules, pinpointing the Shannon farm under the flight path. We arrived at Paradise as the first light of dawn touched the sleepy little town, its few houses and barns emerging from the mist like ghosts of the prairie. Disguised as land surveyors, Poirot in a rough jacket and cap that he bore with the stoicism of a martyr, muttering about the indignity to his person. We made our way to the Shannon farm on the outskirts. The place was, as Urschel had described, a dilapidated shotgun shack with a tin roof that gleamed dully in the morning sun, surrounded by overgrown fields that whispered of neglect. Poirot, pretending to take measurements with a borrowed theodolite, positioned himself near the neighboring property, where an elderly farmer sat on his porch, rocking gently and eyeing us with mild curiosity. My friend, ever the master of conversation, engaged him with that blend of charm and precision which never failed to elicit confidences. "Good morning, sir," Poirot began, tipping his cap. "We are surveying for new lines. Perhaps you know the Shannon place. Empty now, it seems." The old man chuckled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Empty? I since yesterday. R.J. Shannon and his kin cleared out quick like broke his heart. That Slick lease business up in Oklahoma lost the bid to Urschel. Went bankrupt over it. Railed constant about being robbed blind. Then his daughter Catherine shows up with her husband George Kelly, and that no-good Bates fell limping one talks with a lisp. They hold up here plotting something fierce. Heard Kelly say we'll make that thief pay double. Left for Memphis pockets bulging like they'd hit a gusher." Poirot's eyes sharpened behind his disguise, but he maintained his casual air. "Most interesting. And this Kelly, big man perhaps with a taste for theatrics, big as an ox and mouthy too. Carried a gun case like it was his baby. Woman ran the show though, sharp tongue on her." Thanking the farmer with a nod, Poirot led us to the shack itself, where a loose board allowed entry without force. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of unwashed clothes and cigar smoke. The bedpost bore the telltale scars of chains, and on a rickety table lay scattered papers, clippings from oil trade journals about the slick lease auction, annotated in angry scrolls, Urschel's theft, revenge due, and a discarded ledger detailing Shannon's financial ruin, the loss directly tied to the failed bid. "Behold, Hastings," Poirot whispered, his voice triumphant as he pocketed a sample. "The evidence speaks." The Fields probe, their pretended job hunt, was to confirm Urschel's prosperity from that lease, whispered among the roughnecks. The grudge fueled the strike. Vengeance for Shannon's bankruptcy masked as simple greed. We wired Culvin forthwith from the local post office. Motive proven. Slick grudge via lease records. Witness affidavit. Suspects bound for Memphis. In Memphis, a modest riverfront and known for transient oilmen yielded the breakthrough. A tip from the desk clerk about a boastful couple flashing cash led to the dawn raid on September 12th. As agents breached the door, Kelly, caught unawares, raised his hands with his infamous quip, "Don't shoot, G-men," thus christening the federal agents in the public eye. The haul was damning. Bundles of the ransom money, serial numbers matching, lease clippings mirroring those from the shack, fingerprints on a discarded cigar case. Bates cowed in a corner, his limp betraying him, while Catherine stood defiant, her eyes like daggers. Her sneer faltered under the weight of evidence. Urschel's testimony, the neighbor's affidavit, the annotated clippings, and she confessed enough to seal their fate. The trials in Oklahoma City were swift. Life sentences mete out. Back at Harrington's ranch for our farewells, Urschel gripped Poirot's hand firmly. "You drew the grudge from those overheard words." Monsieur turned a whisper into the roar of justice. Poirot bowed modestly. "It was the method, the order. Chaos cannot endure it." As our train chugged eastward, the prairie fading into memory, I turned to my friend. "You illuminated the why, Poirot, transformed echoes into thunder." He sighed, adjusting his mustache with a contented air. "Perhaps, Hastings, but next time a quiet murder in England. Less dust, more tizen." Yet in my heart I knew that adventure would call again. The little gray cells ever vigilant. Epilogue. Reflections from Whitehaven Mansions. As I penned these final lines in the quiet sanctuary of our flat at Whitehaven Mansions, with the familiar London fog pressing against the panes like an old acquaintance, the events of that Oklahoma summer seemed both distant and indelibly etched upon my memory. The vast prairies, the relentless sun, the acrid scent of oil rising from the earth, all fade into the gentle rhythm of English life. Yet they linger in the occasional dream, a reminder of the wild justice we pursued across the Atlantic. Correspondence from Harrington and Urschel arrived sporadically, bearing tidings of restored peace. The Fields thriving once more, the shadow of the kidnapping lifted like a storm cloud dispersed. The American press, ever sensational, continues to laud Poirot as the Belgian sleuth who cracked the oil baron case, clippings of which he clips meticulously for his scrapbook, though he feigns indifference. Pa Hastings, the mental processes require no applause. It is the order it restores that matters. For my part, the adventure has left me with a newfound appreciation for the quiet puzzles of home. A poisoned teacup in a country manor perhaps, or a misplaced will in Mayfair. Poirot ensconced in his armchair with a Tyson at hand echoes the sentiment. America was stimulating monotony, but too vast, too untidy. Here the crimes they have symmetry. Yet as the fire crackles and the city hums beyond, I sense the pull of mystery and new fate. That capricious weaver seldom rests long. And when it calls again, I know we shall answer. The little gray cells leading the way.